with the ring bearer, right? Jesus is under the eye of the wrath of God. And we probably don't think enough about that. That he bears the sins of the world. But even then it goes further, and this has been a really fun thing for me in the last year. It really hit me different. In 2 Corinthians, where it says, he who knew no sin bore our sin? No, what does it say? He who knew no sin became sin. Like he is the problem, right? In this moment, as he's carrying our sin, Paul just puts it in even a more deep and powerful way. So this is real anguish. Remove this cup. Maybe there's a different way for this atonement to happen. Maybe it can be delayed and done later. Or maybe it doesn't take place at all, and all the people perish in the judgment of God. Is that true? No, that's not it. So maybe it could be done in some other way. We don't know. We don't know the answer to that, like what is at the heart of Jesus' prayer, except that it is a real prayer. It is not a demand, but it's a real prayer from the human and divine heart of Jesus in subservience, right, to the Father's will. But not what I will, what you will. As you read this, as you look at the prayer of Jesus in Gethsemane, don't ever lose sight of what is he getting at? What does he mean? What does he ultimately want? This whole scene is a beautiful mystery. That's what it is. The Son of God conversing with his Father in the height of his anguish. My soul is sorrowful even to death. We can't fathom all the intricacies and the depth of this moment. Doesn't mean we shouldn't try, but we just won't ever. So appreciate just everything that's going on here. But at the end, he's all business, right? He's upset with him a little bit. Simon, he said to Peter, Simon. That's like one of the only times in Mark he uses his actual name, not Peter. So, Simon, business, right? Are you asleep? And then he goes to the end, though. Are you still sleeping? It is enough. The hour has come. I thought that was important. The hour is what he was trying to avoid. And he says, the hour has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going, see my betrayers at hand. So by the end of this is a real prayer, and I wrote it here already. The Father and Son are on the same page. He gets done praying. The disciples are sleepy, but by the end of it, they're on the same page. All right? Questions? All right? Huge connections here. If you go back to chapter 13, verses 34 through 37. Like a man going on a journey, he leaves home, puts his servants in charge, each with his work. Therefore, stay awake. You don't know when the master of the house will come in the evening or at midnight or when the rooster crows, lest he come suddenly and find you asleep. And what I say to you, I say to all, stay awake. There's a deeper, eschatological truth to that part of chapter 13, but we're seeing it, we've said this word a few times, proleptically, like ahead of time. That's happening here now in the Garden of Gethsemane, right? Where the disciples who just heard, stay awake, what are they doing? They're falling asleep. As their leader and best friend is in deep, dark anguish, right? So we see that there's even the rooster crow, right? Did I just say that? So there's connections there ahead of the eschatological fulfillment. Kurt. Woo! All of the above. All of the above. I think Bierman echoed this a previous week. The disciples are not to be pitied. Like as we're reading this, our human side might say, I mean, come on, I think there have been some comments. I get that, right? The human side, would we have known any different? Would we have known any better? But the whole thing with Mark is they should have known better. And so try to divorce your human side from the divine side, where the divine side says, no, you've seen everything. And we see the minor characters, like the woman who anointed him, was that last week? The woman who anointed him with a really expensive perfume. Huge sign of faith. She believed the passion predictions, which is why she anointed him ahead of her. So she has more faith than the disciples, right? So we see these minor characters, even Jairus, I believe, help my unbelief. He has more faith than the disciples, right? So the minor characters in Mark that show up once, they have more faith than the disciples. We're, I think, supposed to see that these disciples are kind of bumbling fools, and that's all right. It all ends up okay for them, except Judas, and but the message of Mark is the message to the disciples, right? Believe his word, and then you will see. We're going to see that here in the resurrection account. The word of Jesus is paramount, tantamount, primary. I don't know if any of those words are. The word of Jesus is tops. So if he says, I'm going to suffer, die, and rise on the third day, what should the disciples expect to happen? Boom. And they don't. They all run away, right? So believe his word, and that comes, well, it's in the baptism, it's in the transfiguration. This is my beloved son. Do what? Listen to him. And we're going to see it at the resurrection. We're going to get to it in the next 30 minutes. And immediately while he was speaking, Judas came with one of the 12. I'm not going to read the whole thing. Don't overlook what this would have been like, again, for anyone hearing this for the first time. We already knew that something was going on, right, when Jesus predicted this. But one of the 12, don't overlook. It's so simple. We hear it every year. Judas, it was one of the 12. This is a deep, the most heinous betrayal you can imagine. That's what we should see when we read one of the 12. I wrote down in my notes, A2 Brute, right? A2 Brutus, even you, Brutus, and you. So, that is, the gut-wrenching, I don't have the words. Just don't overlook it, right? That is, it's on purpose for the original readers of Mark. Because also think about what's happening when that Jesus is going through. What's happening? We talked about this with Josephus. Was that last week? Josephus talked all about when the temple's going to fall, 66 to 70 AD, and there would be these brigands, there would be the zealots, and the zealots would go one against the other, and they would divide families, and even one of the 12. So if you're a Jewish person in the middle of the fall of the temple and the Roman occupation, or even afterwards, after all that's happened and everything that you knew and loved is destroyed, and the people you know and loved, maybe you don't know them very well anymore, right? Oh, Jesus went through that too, even more powerfully than I can probably understand. So there's a reason I think that Mark puts this in here, all right? The one I will kiss is the man, and he kissed him, right? So kissed, how do we read that? One commentary I was looking at said, it's either real affection, maybe Judas, and I don't think this is true, but maybe Judas, maybe there's a pang, a part of him is I love you and I'm sorry, or that there's actual joy. That's this makes Judas even more depraved, right? That it was a kiss. Obviously, there's the kiss of peace. Maybe kissing was. I'm not an expert on the kissing protocols of ancient Judaism, but this is heinous, right? Again, all of Mark and everything from Holy Week and even from Mark chapter 8, when his face is set toward Jerusalem, he starts with the passion predictions. And as we go into this week, it's just like this vortex, this maelstrom is getting tighter and tighter and tighter, and all the evil of the world, and I've said this in sermons, the social, political, religious, natural evil, the sun goes away for 3 hours, and God's in control of it all. But as we're reading this, we should be seeing it's just getting worse and worse and worse. The entire time, it's spiraling to this pit of misery on the place of the skull, right? So it's getting worse. He kisses him. Ha! And Jesus said, if you come out against a robber with swords and clubs, day after day I was with you, and they all left him and fled, right? They just said, we will never, right? And they all said the same. If I must die with you, I will not deny you. Doesn't matter. They all left him. And a young man followed him with nothing but a linen cloth about his body. Some people say this is John Mark. I don't, and I've probably said that before too, but the more and more I thought about it preparing for this, I don't think that's true. Because John Mark didn't really get involved until the book of Acts that we're aware of. And if John Mark was getting this from Peter, it might have been Peter saw this guy, but it would just, otherwise Peter would have told, hey, John Mark, remember when you fled naked? That's just not part of but what this probably means, a young man followed him, nothing but a linen cloth. A way to, that Greek is to say maybe stripped for battle, right? They had swords. Apparently, I don't know if Jesus just let them bring them, but so here, one of those who stood by drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest, struck a bad guy, cut his ear off. So I guess Jesus let them bring swords, or they had them maybe they're more like pocket daggers, I don't know. So this man with a linen cloth about his body, prepared for battle, is a way to read that. But he left the linen cloth and ran away naked. There's not a whole lot in here to say that has to be John Mark, but the author, right? They go to the high priest. So now this is the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin are the chief priests, the elders, and the scribes. Now, chief priests were typically Sadducees, which is like a political party we said last week. The elders were typically sympathetic to the Pharisees, who were very into the moral traditions of Israel, and the scribes. So Jesus already met with all these people. None of them like him. So this is the legal proceedings. And what they do here, the whole council was seeking testimony. They found none. False witness, and they stood up and said, we heard him say, I'll destroy this temple. In 3 days I will build another, not made with hands. Why was that what they went with? Who do they ultimately have to go to get Jesus killed? The Romans. The Romans. What do the Romans care about? Do the Romans care about this guy saying he's Israel's king? Or no, I mean, yes, they will, but he is a miracle worker. No, the Romans were really into buildings and sanctuaries and some of that history there. So if Jesus is saying, I'm going to tear down this temple that's kind of keeping the Jewish people at peace here, the Romans wouldn't like that, right? So that's a suggestion there for why they went with that. But they didn't actually have anything. Their testimony did not agree. Stood up in their midst, and Jesus, he's almost egging them on because their testimonies didn't agree. They couldn't do it on their own. So what does he say? Are you the Christ? Jesus said, I am. And that's, from John. We see that in John the 7 times. Ego, eimi, the Greek transliteration of Yahweh. So Jesus says, I am, which is the name of Yahweh, and you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven. Jesus gave him to them on a silver platter. High priest tore his garment. And then starting here, we're going to get a whole bunch of irony and a whole bunch of Old Testament prophetic fulfillment. All right? Starting at the end, kind of verse 65. All right? And this is true, by the way. You'll see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven. That's talking not just about the eschatological day. That's happening proleptically ahead of time at the cross and at the resurrection, right? So they're going to see this. When he's hanging on a cross, the Son of Man has come in power, right? So a lot of Isaiah 53. I'll let you read that. The lamb led to slaughter opens not his mouth. We're going to see a lot of that here. So, he remains silent. So they're below. Peter was below in the courtyard. One of the servant girls of the high priest came, seeing Peter warming himself. She looked at him. You also were with the Nazarene. So 3 times, right? He denies 3 times. Also, what you're supposed to see here is the escalation. We would say that Mark wants you to see the escalation of events. So he denied it, went on. This man is one again. Again, he denied it. And then verse 71, he began to invoke a curse on himself and to swear, I do not know this man. So it's not, he denied it. He denied it again, and then he gets so upset. Maybe you've heard this before. It's escalating. Denies, or was it even above too? Hold on. Oh, maybe it's in the Greek. Just know it escalates. Any questions? Marlon. Mm-hmm. Yes. It's Simon Peter is like a not so non-essential part. I mean, he's an essential part of the story, obviously, but he's almost like a subplot here. And what he's going to see, he does stick around, even though he denies, and the height of treachery, maybe to call curse on himself. I mean, that's strong language for a Jew, right? For an Israelite. He's like a subplot in that dip into redemption that's coming at the end, right? Because even at the very end, chapter 16, verse 8, go and tell who? Peter, right? Go tell Peter, right? So there's a lot of that here that Peter, chief of the screw-ups, but even he's not too far gone, right? Other questions? oh, that's what it was. I neither know nor understand what you mean. Right? So he's like, I don't know what you mean. Right? Then he denies Jesus himself. Then he invokes a curse and swears. Right? So it's not understanding to, no, I get what you're saying, and no, to, etc. Good. We are into chapter 15, and we're only doing 8 verses of chapter 16, so we might make it. All right. One of the great joys of my job, it's a calling, it's a job, it's whatever, is if people email me questions or just call me. If you just call me and say, I have a theological question for you, like I'll like turn into a peacock. Like I get so excited. So if we don't have time for all your questions today, just feel free to email me or anytime. Call. All right, so delivers them over. As soon as the chief priests held council, they bound Jesus, delivered him over to Pilate. So apparently there's an age-old question, which I may be daft, I just don't see all the time. Are the Jews responsible for the death of Jesus? What would Luther say? Okay, so are the Jews solely responsible? Well, what does that say? They delivered him over to who? Pilate, because Rome has the authority, not the Jews. Is Rome solely responsible then? No. Are we responsible for the death of Jesus? Did we kill him? Yeah, but I still don't think that's the fullness of the answer. Who is ultimately responsible for the death of Jesus? God is, right? And we saw that, right, from Zechariah 9. I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will scatter. Like, it is God who is in control here, even as everything's getting dark and terrible. And yes, it's our sin he carried. Yes, it's the Jews' 3,000 years of idolatry. Yes, it's the Romans, pagan. All of that he's carrying and becoming or like owning. But ultimately, it's God's authority on whether or not Jesus dies and rises again. So again, a lot of irony here. Hey, we're going to see this. We're going to see Eve. I read this quote. Eve was the first to taste death. A daughter of Eve will be the first to witness life. Well, Mary Magdalene, a woman with 7 demons, she gets to see him first. It's going to be all right. All right, quick. Sorry. I don't know. I mean, it probably depends who you are and where you are in faith. Maybe I've just lived through it 37 times where I'm like, I'm just used to it. Maybe it should bother me more, like the amount of evil that's actually being used here to orchestrate the death of the Son of God. End of the day, God's in control. It's his plan. And this was always the plan, right? We've talked about that before. This was plan A. It's not that Eve ate the fruit and then Adam ate the fruit and God threw up his hands and said, well, now you got to die. Sorry. This was always plan A. And the new creation was always plan A. Even when the first creation was made, right? That the new creation was always in the back of God's mind. Like, that's where we're going, right? Kurt. Kurt, you got to call me for that one. The only answer, there is no answer for theodicy. That's the question. I did a whole Bible study on this. You should go back and watch YouTube. That was a couple years ago. No, the only answer for theodicy, really, like, why does God allow, all-powerful God, all-loving, why does he allow good things to happen to bad people or bad things to happen to good people? One is to say, I don't know. Like, that's the first step. I have no idea. God's God and I'm not. The second thing is not an explanation. It's a proclamation, right? I don't know that, but I do know Jesus rose from the dead. It's not an explanation. There is no explanation to suffice. And the third answer, that's not really an answer, is to focus then in this world, in our lives, on what is good and beautiful and true. Because those are things of God. It's like in the midst of the darkness, what is good, what is beautiful, what is true. That comes after proclamation. So that's not to say that comes before Jesus. But that's, I mean, when we talked, last year about music, story, art, those good, beautiful, true things that point us to the cross are ways to live faithfully and maybe even a little more joyfully than otherwise in a world that can be dark, even though Jesus rose from the dead. Proclamation. All right. Delivers him over. Scourged him. I thought this was interesting. So there's so much irony, right? Are you the king of the Jews? Yes, he is, okay? Chief priest stirred up the crowds. Barabbas. You know what Barabbas means? This is ironic. You ready? So if someone's name is Bar Jonah, it means they're son of Jonah. So Bar, son of the father, right? So they took the son of the father instead of the son of the father, right? They're just the wrong one. So there's irony abounding in this, right? Also, Pilate is clearly in charge. There's a couple different reasons we see that he's almost like asserting his authority. So we sometimes tend to pity Pilate. Oh, he washed his hands of it, and his wife, and No, Pilate knew what he was doing to appease, like just another day in the life of the procurator, the prefect. Just another day in the life of the prefect. Send some man to die, keep the crowds happy, keep the chief priests knowing that they're under my thumb. So Pilate's in charge of this whole time. And it's funny, Pilate wishing to make, you could translate this maybe a little different, to make satisfaction. I don't know if this is Mark's intention, but who actually makes satisfaction for the people? Jesus, right? So maybe a little bit of double entendre there. Having scourged Jesus, we think of scourging, what do we immediately skip to? The Passion of the Christ, right? There's nothing in Mark that's quite that graphic. Instead of the physical violence, which is real, right? We can see that. The highlight here is the spiritual and emotional torment that he's going through. The physical stuff happens too. That matters. But I think what we're supposed to get more of is the mocking, the pain of being under the eye of the wrath of God. See that. So what I did too here is I underlined all the Old Testament, or the irony here, right? A purple cloak, is that actually for royalty? You know this, yes. A crown, is that for royalty? Yes. They began to salute him. Hail, King of the Jews. Was he the King of the Jews? Yes. And you've probably heard this all before, but it's just all a reed, maybe mimics a scepter. They knelt down in homage to him. He had someone carry his cross. Do kings have people carry their burdens? There's irony here, both intentionally or unintentionally, for this death of the Son of God. As a reminder, especially with this whole bit with Pilate, in first century Rome, life was really cheap. This meant nothing to him, to Pilate. Nothing at all. He didn't care. All right. A couple other things. The soldiers were mocking Jesus. Let's not forget the Romans typically despised the Jews. So whether he was their king or not, they didn't care. Simon, right here, Simon of Cyrene. Cyrene, this is interesting, that he is not even from the land of Israel. So it would have been from Libya in North Africa. As we read in the scriptures about how God will gather the ends of the earth, right, in Zion. Here's a man that's not from around there, right? They brought him to a place, Golgotha, offered him wine mixed with myrrh. That's a drugging agent. He did not take it. He would need his full human faculties. He had a different cup to drink. Does that make sense? The cup of the Father, not the cup that's going to help him black out, the pain, right? Crucified with him 2 robbers, one in his life. And even I think we talked about this at least in one of the small groups I led. So James and John has to be at his right and at his left when he's in his glory. Who's actually there? 2 robbers. He's sitting here in his glory, hanging on a cross. Right and his left are 2 insurrectionists or rebels or just low-life scum. And they are next to the king in his glory. That's not supposed to be overlooked. But even they, who are actually worthy of their crimes, we get that in a different account, they are ridiculing him too. So we talked about this previously. So you have men, women, children, slaves, crucified people, right? If you're looking at social status, landowning men, maybe other men, women, children, it gets dicey down there. But at the very bottom are crucified people. And crucified people are mocking you. You are the lowest of the low, right? They're mocking him. So let's see, what other notes do I have here? The humiliation, right? So they crucified him while he's hanging there, right? Divided his garments, casting lots for them. Like, can you imagine hanging there naked and they're just betting on your clothes to see what they're going to take home for their wife, whatever? This is just dark, okay? It's dark. Then it becomes physically dark. The 6th hour had come. There's darkness. All right. We're almost there, almost there. Oh, one other thing. Right here, this is key. At the very end, with the chief priests, the scribes, let the Christ, the King of Israel, come down now from the cross so that we may see and believe. This ties back to, I think, maybe what Kurt, like, they wanted it the wrong way around. And they said that earlier, too. Show us a sign. What do you say? I'll be darned if there's a sign given to this generation. They want the same thing. Give us something to see, and then we'll believe you. Those crucified with him also reviled him. All right, so we go forward. The cup from the garden, right? Let this cup pass from me. This is where he's just it's to the dregs. It's gone, right? He's drinking it down. Jesus uttered a loud cry and breathed his last. When he breathed his last, the word there is ex epneumatos or something. Pneuma, I'm going to write it down. P-N-E-U. I'm screwing up my Greek. Brother pastors, seminarians, don't look at me. All right, pneuma. So he ex-pneumaed. He out his spirit. He breathed his last. So the spirit that came into him in his baptism, he's breathed it out. Who is facing him? This is awesome. Who's facing him? Stood facing him. So it's like, this is going to be weird, Sarah, but you're right in front. So I'm not Jesus, but you get it, right? And I breathe out my spirit, the Holy Spirit, and I breathe it, and then I just go like that. Okay, don't do that, right? I mean, we can't overlook the fact that the Spirit comes out of him into the centurion, who by rights is a pagan, right? Probably worships the grand host of the deities of Rome, right? It says, truly this man, Mark didn't do this on accident, right? The Spirit went into the centurion, and the Spirit gave him the power of utterance of the truth that we haven't heard from anybody else in this entire gospel, except for Mark's prologue, to say this was the Son of God, right? Right? He ex-pneumaed, he ex-spirited. Truly this man was the Son of God. I said this in the small group thing. Was is not quite right. He still is, right? Even though he's dead, but he's dead. So that's what the centurion was going with. Then there were women. Jesus is buried. Oh, one other thing. The curtain of the temple was torn in two. This is awesome, from top to bottom. So a lot of people will say things like this. The barrier between, I copied this from a commentary. The barrier between God and man is removed. The old sacrificial cult has been ended. God is leaving the temple. No longer is his presence to be found there. That already happened. That already happened with Jesus when he left the temple the last time in chapter 13. So anyway, there's a whole bunch of reasons that people say, why did the curtain of the temple tear? The curtain of the temple, in Herod's temple, the second temple Judaism, had like the cosmos on it, embroidered. So when the cosmos rend, right, because that's happened a few other times, or at least once, right? Where? Chapter 1, right? At his baptism, right? The heavens opened, the heavens rended. Rend the heavens and come down. That's an Advent collect, the prayers, that we say on Sundays. Rend the heavens and come down. So rend the heavens. That happens at his baptism. That happens at his death, right? Not literally, but I wouldn't say symbolically either. But the point is the heavens are rending at both points. And the truth about Jesus, this is my son. This was the Son of God. You get the voice, the truth, right, at both events. It's really, really neat. okay? Going on down, Jesus is buried. He's buried, tomb that had been cut out of the rock. So probably an expensive rock-hewn tomb into the rock. Isaiah 53 made his grave with a rich man, right? So another fulfillment of prophecy. Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of Joseph, saw where he was laid. Wow, that was fast. We got 3 minutes. 3 minutes, ready? We're doing it. All right, chapter 16. Jesus arose before sunrise, right? He died Thursday before sundown, died Thursday before sundown. No. Died Friday before sundown. He was arrested at night, and even if you think about the cock crowing when Peter denied him, so maybe that was Friday morning, dies before Friday sundown. That's day one. Saturday, he's in the tomb till sundown Saturday. That's day two. And after sundown Saturday, it's technically day 3. Right, so 3 days in the tomb, he is. It's sometime after the sun goes down. So if you haven't ever been to Easter Vigil service, you should go. You should go. It's Saturday at 6. It's going to be fun. It starts at Good Friday. It ends at Easter. And it's recognizing that holy mystery that at some point tonight, like we don't know when, but at some point tonight, the world changed. History was altered. And the plan of God is taking one more step to new creation fruition, right? So come on Holy Saturday. The women, again, were first witnesses, right? That they were told by the young man sitting dressed in a white robe, right? Which is also, we talked about this kind of the transfiguration being ahead of time, pointing to the resurrection, the transfiguration, because there's white. And so they get there. Do not be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. That's a big word there, was. He has risen. He is not here. See the place. But go tell his disciples that he's going before you to Galilee. There you will see him, and this is key. Just as he told you. Believe that what he told you is going to come true, and guess what's going to happen? Then you're going to see him. So what comes first? Faith or sight? Faith. And that's true. They went out, they fled from the tomb. A way to understand this, and we believe, and I'm going to take 1 minute to tell you why. They went out, fled from the tomb for trembling and astonishment. We said those words mean something divine happened. That's what we're supposed to understand. They said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Fear means something divine happened throughout the Gospel of Mark. A way to say this, they were afraid, you know. I wrote something more. Way to interpret it. Given the circumstances, the women fled from the tomb and were afraid, you know, just as you would have been. So imagine you're a first-time reader, Mark. Maybe the temple just fell. Everything's in chaos. But they have what they had. But you have, what they had. The word, the promise of Jesus, just as he told you. And just as it was for them, for you, this promise is all you need. Right? So there's a few reasons we believe that I believe the Gospel of Mark actually ends here. There are grammar and linguistic, like syntax differences between the first 16 chapters and 8 verses of Mark and the last 12. There's very clear evidence that it was a different writer. The earliest manuscripts, and we get this from like Eusebius, there are a few others. I mentioned them at the small groups. The earliest references to Mark don't have this ending. The earliest manuscripts don't have it. There's also, again, I think, even on its own, this would be enough, the narrative effect, right? That says the way this ends is beautiful. Like, if we understand it rightly, it's a beautiful ending. It's masterful, right? It leads the reader to say, well, what do I believe, right? Furthermore, everything else that I didn't include up there is elsewhere in the scriptures. So we're not losing it. There are people, this is a big thing for Lutherans. Lutherans like, we have to have it because it's in the confessions. And I swore on the confessions. I'm a pastor. Rah, rah, rah. It doesn't matter. Everything else in the confessions or in the last 12 verses of Mark that is quoted in our Lutheran confessions is found elsewhere. The manuscripts that Luther was working on to translate from Hebrew and Greek to German had those 12 verses. This wasn't something they even talked about, really, that I'm aware of. So it's not a big deal. Furthermore, everything, so say you read those 12 verses, verse 9 through 20, and you're like, I really like those. Great. Those are found elsewhere too. The road to Emmaus, you can find that. You've got the women meeting Jesus. You've got the Great Commission, go and teach and baptize. It's all elsewhere. We just don't think the Mark included it at the end of his. Does that make sense? So it's all still good and true. It's nothing about this should make us shake in our faith or that the Bible's wrong. Like, I don't think that. It's okay. Mark didn't write it. No big deal. Any questions? Did it. If you have any questions, concerns, if you hate everything I just said, shoot me an email. Let's pray. Father in heaven, this week is the holiest and yet darkest of weeks. So help us walk. Help us walk this road with your Son, our Savior, into the teeth of darkness, into the light of a new dawn. Thank you for Mark, his witness, his recording of the truth. Continue to feed us, Father. For Jesus' sake and in his name we pray. Amen. We